Well, it's Mr. Dale again, and we are now in Module 3. And the objective of this video is to talk about the grammar that we will need in Module 3. Let's take a quick overview look at the grammar. So the objective of this video is to talk about how to create questions correctly in the present tense, remembering that we need the auxiliary verb do to make our questions correct. And then we will move on to frequency adverbs and how to use them correctly. Here's an example. She always takes the bus. Here's our frequency adverb. And we will revisit the third person. Make sure that we really understand how to use third person correctly. Here are some common questions that you will need to memorize for our class discussions. Where do you live? Very important question. Or where does he live, or she? When do you wake up? What does he eat for breakfast? Or what do you eat for breakfast? Again, we need to memorize these questions, how to make them for good practice in class. Here's a really important one. How many children do you have? Okay. Plural for child. We have one child, but the plural for child is children. And we need to use that form of the noun when we ask a question. So many people want to say, how many childs do you have? But that is incorrect. We need to be saying children. That's why it's important to be practicing these questions at home. Next one, when do you go to work? What time do you start work? What does she do? Meaning, what does she do in her job? Okay, so that'll be a big part of our in-class discussion, is just using and asking questions correctly. Let's move on to frequency adverbs and see how they work. Frequency adverbs tell us how often something happens. Okay? And an example of a frequency adverb in Spanish, I believe, would be something like siempre, or always. I think I spelled it correctly. The important thing to remember here is that a frequency adverb always goes before, we put before here, an action verb. I always play soccer. I never go to the beach. So we put the frequency adverb before an action verb. However, the frequency adverb goes after the to be verb. I am sometimes sad. Let's look at some examples. The girl is, here's the frequency adverb, after the to be verb. The girl is always happy. But when we talk about the verb, here she is smiling. The girl, here it is before, always smiles. So frequency adverb after the to be verb, but before action verbs. Makes us sound very much more natural when we're speaking. Let's look at the frequency of these adverbs. Always is como siempre. Usually, I think, would be como usualmente. Often, I don't know in Spanish, but it's somewhere in the middle, right? We often go to the beach. Sometimes is very similar to often. Rarely is como casi nunca, right? And never would be como nunca. Mike never plays hockey. So if we look at the graph, always happens a lot, never happens. And then obviously we have some frequency adverbs that describe what happens in the middle. So that's frequency adverbs. We put them before action verbs, after the to be verb. Let's just take another quick look at third person and how to use it correctly. Remember, the third person subject pronouns are he and she and it and variations. of it. For example, Mr. Dale or other examples. So here's some examples. I read. And the important thing here is that we put the S on the verb with he, she, and it. So we would say he reads, she reads, and it reads. Remember, present tense describes something that happens every day or is a routine. Again, we need to remember that third person can be more than just he, she, it. It can take other forms of singular subjects. And we talked about that. Very important to remember when we're speaking. Now, this is an important thing. It talks about the spelling of the third person and also the pronunciation of how it sounds. So let's look at it. If the verb ends in most consonants, we just add an S. For example, likes and works. And again, the sound is like an S. S. Okay, you can imagine a snake or something. However, if the verb ends in CH, SH, S, X, Z, or I'm going to put here SS as well, like this example, we need to add ES to the end of the verb for third person. For example, watches and finishes. And it is a very different sound when we pronounce it. It is the is sound. Okay, it almost sounds like the Z. All right. Now, the other important one to remember is that if the verb ends in a consonant plus the Y, we need to drop the Y and we need to add IES. For example, the word worry originally had a Y, but we drop it when we have a consonant and a Y, and it becomes worries. Same thing with the word cry. Originally, it had a Y. We have a consonant plus a Y. We take away the Y, and we add IES. Pronunciation. Exactly like the Z sound. So we would say cries and worries. If the verb ends in a vowel plus a Y, for example, play has a vowel there and then the Y, we do not drop the Y. Instead, we simply add an S to the verb, like stays. And the pronunciation is the same. Has the Z sound of the Z. So these are some spelling rules we need to make sure, especially when we're writing. But this is an important part in our speaking. We want to pronounce that last S sound correct. So usually we'll take the S sound, like works and likes. However, we do have variations, especially with these ones, where we would say watches, finishes, and then the final Z sound, such as worries, cries, plays, and stays. So that is a quick look at the grammar for Module 3. I really encourage you to be practicing your questions, almost memorizing them for class. Practice using the frequency adverbs with the be verb and with action verbs so that you can sound natural. And again, just remember the third person in your speaking and how to pronounce it correctly when you speak.